Mother is kicked out of the house while pregnant on Christmas Eve, but she wins the lottery. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The soft glow of Christmas lights illuminated the frosted windows of the house Clara once called home. Inside, muffled laughter echoed as the warmth of the fire crackled in the background. But Clara wasn't inside. She stood on the icy sidewalk, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the heartbreak of what had just happened. "Get out, Clara. I'm done with your excuses," her husband, Greg, had bellowed moments before slamming the door in her face. His words still rang in her ears as the December chill seeped through her thin coat. She was 7 months pregnant, with nowhere to go and no one to call. Greg had always been cruel, but tonight, he had crossed a line, accusing her of being a burden. He told her to leave, ignoring her pleas for mercy. It didn't matter to him that it was Christmas Eve, or that she was carrying their unborn child. To him, Clara was just another obstacle standing in the way of his ambitions. Clara clutched her small duffel bag, containing little more than a change of clothes and a few toiletries. She hadn't even been allowed to grab her prenatal vitamins or the baby clothes she had been meticulously collecting from thrift stores. Her breath clouded in the air as she started walking, unsure of where her feet would take her. The streets were eerily quiet, the holiday cheer muted by the bitter cold. Each step felt heavier than the last as Clara fought to keep tears from freezing on her cheeks. The life she had built with Greg had crumbled in a single night, leaving her with nothing but questions and despair. After walking for hours, Clara's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting on a bench outside a gas station. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she stared blankly at the convenience store. People came and went, their arms filled with last-minute holiday purchases, but no one seemed to notice the pregnant woman sitting alone in the cold. Clara debated calling a shelter but hesitated. The thought of sharing her pain with strangers felt unbearable. Instead, she shuffled into the store, hoping to find a moment of warmth. The clerk barely glanced at her as she wandered the aisles, pretending to browse. Her eyes landed on a rack of lottery tickets near the counter. $1 for a dream, the slogan read. Clara scoffed bitterly. A dream. She had spent her entire life chasing dreams, love, stability, happiness, and now she had nothing to show for it. But something about the ticket called to her. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the irony. Whatever it was, she found herself fishing the last crumpled dollar bill from her coat pocket. "Merry Christmas," the clerk muttered as he handed her the ticket. Clara nodded, tucking it into her bag. It wasn't hope she felt. It was a small, fleeting distraction from her reality. Clara left the store and continued walking until she found an old church with its doors open. The warm light spilling out onto the snow-covered steps felt inviting, almost as if it were calling her inside. She hesitated, but her aching body begged for rest. Inside, the scent of pine and candle wax filled the air. A few parishioners sat scattered among the pews, their heads bowed in prayer. Clara chose a corner near the back, where she could be alone. The silence was both a comfort and a burden as she let her thoughts consume her. "Rough night." A gentle voice interrupted her spiral of despair. Clara looked up to see an older woman with kind eyes and a shawl draped over her shoulders. She introduced herself as Margaret, a volunteer who helped run the church's food bank. Clara hesitated but eventually opened up, sharing pieces of her story. Margaret listened without judgment, her expression softening with each word. "You've been dealt a cruel hand, my dear," Margaret said, placing a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. "But you're stronger than you know. And this little one," she glanced at Clara's swollen belly. "This little one is going to bring you more joy than you can imagine." Clara wanted to believe her, but the weight of her circumstances felt insurmountable. Margaret insisted she stay the night at the church's shelter, promising a warm meal and a bed. It wasn't much, but it was more kindness than Clara had received in months. Over the next few weeks, Clara slowly began to rebuild her life. She found a part-time job at a local diner, where the pay was meager but enough to afford a small room at a boarding house. Margaret continued to check in on her, offering support and encouragement. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Clara remembered the lottery ticket buried at the bottom of her bag. She had all but forgotten about it. With nothing better to do, she turned on the small television in her room and watched as the winning numbers were announced. Her heart raced as she matched the first number, then the second, and the third. By the time the final number was called, Clara was shaking so hard she nearly dropped the ticket. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice trembling. But it was real. Clara had just won $50 million. Clara sat frozen on the edge of her bed, the lottery ticket trembling in her hand. The numbers on the screen glared back at her, confirming the impossible truth. $50 million. It felt like a dream she didn't dare believe. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her mind raced with questions. What now? Should she tell someone? Was it safe to claim such an enormous prize? Could she trust anyone after what Greg had done to her? That night, Clara barely slept. The magnitude of her win loomed over her like a tidal wave, threatening to consume her. But as dawn broke and sunlight spilled through the cracked blinds, a sense of calm washed over her. This wasn't just luck, it was a lifeline. Second chance, and she would make the most of it. Clara decided to move cautiously. She reached out to a financial advisor recommended by Margaret, a kind woman named Evelyn who had helped others navigate sudden windfalls. Clara met Evelyn in a small private office, her hands still shaking as she handed over the ticket. "This is life-changing," Evelyn said after verifying the ticket's authenticity. "But it's also life-complicating. The key is to stay grounded and make thoughtful decisions." Clara nodded, hanging on to every word. She knew this wasn't just about securing her future. It was about protecting her unborn child. Evelyn helped her establish a trust, ensuring her identity would remain anonymous when she claimed the prize. She also advised Clara to lay low for a while, giving her time to adjust before making any big changes. For weeks, Clara lived in quiet anticipation. She continued working at the diner, pretending nothing had changed, even as her bank account swelled with millions. She started taking prenatal classes, bought warmer clothes, and stocked up on essentials for the baby. Each small step felt like a victory, a reminder of the resilience she had fought so hard to maintain. One snowy evening, as Clara was leaving the diner after her shift, she spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. Her heart sank as Greg stepped into the light, his face a mix of smugness and desperation. "I heard you're doing okay for yourself," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "Thought I'd check in." Clara stiffened, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag. "What do you want, Greg?" "Come on, Clara. Don't be like that. I made a mistake. I've been thinking about us. About the baby." He gestured toward her belly, his tone suddenly softening. "I want to make things right." Clara felt a surge of anger rise within her. The audacity of this man, the same man who had thrown her out on Christmas Eve, who had left her to fend for herself in the freezing cold, now standing here as if he deserved a second chance. "You didn't care about us when I was freezing on the streets," she shot back, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "What changed?" Greg's smile faltered. For a moment, Clara saw the truth in his eyes. He had heard about her lottery win, though he didn't know the details, and he wanted a piece of it. "I've changed," he insisted. "I realize now how much I hurt you. I want to be there for our child." Clara didn't respond. She turned and walked away, leaving Greg standing in the snow. She knew his words were hollow, but his reappearance stirred something in her, a need to confront the ghosts of her past. In the months that followed, Clara focused on creating a life of stability and joy for her baby. She rented a modest but comfortable apartment, filled it with everything a newborn could need, and even started attending therapy to process the trauma of Greg's abandonment. But Clara's vision extended beyond her own life. She couldn't stop thinking about the women she had met at the shelter, mothers struggling to provide for their children, victims of circumstances beyond their control. Clara saw herself in them and knew she had to act. With Evelyn's guidance, Clara began laying the groundwork for a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers. She poured a significant portion of her winnings into the project, creating programs for housing assistance, job training, and childcare. The foundation, aptly named Second Chances, quickly gained traction, attracting attention from local news outlets and donors. Despite her growing success, Clara kept her identity as the benefactor hidden. She didn't want the focus to be on her. It was about the mission. Word of the Second Chances Foundation spread, reaching even Greg's ears. Struggling financially and facing mounting debts, he saw the organization as a potential lifeline. What he didn't realize was that Clara was the woman behind it all. One afternoon, Greg showed up at the foundation's office, unshaven and visibly worn. He demanded to speak with whoever was in charge, claiming he needed help to get back on his feet. The receptionist hesitated but eventually called Clara. When she walked into the room, Greg's jaw dropped. He stammered, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. You're the one running this place?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Clara crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Surprised, Greg quickly regained his composure, his tone shifting to one of feigned humility. "I'm glad you're doing well, Clara. Really, I am. But things have been hard for me lately. I was hoping—" "You were hoping for a handout," Clara interrupted, her voice cold but calm. "But let me make something clear. This foundation is for people who genuinely want to rebuild their lives. It's not for manipulators looking to take advantage of others." Greg's face flushed with anger. "I'm still the father of your child," he hissed. "Don't forget that." Clara's eyes narrowed. "And that child deserves better than a father who only shows up when he smells money." She turned and walked away, leaving Greg sputtering in frustration. As spring approached, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Hope, a symbol of the new life they were both embarking on. Holding her daughter for the first time, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her place in the world. Little did she know, Greg's desperation was about to take a darker turn, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation. Greg's desperation didn't wane after Clara's firm dismissal. If anything, it grew sharper, festering into something darker. His debts were mounting, and his options were dwindling. The whispers of Clara's success and her newfound stability were everywhere, and Greg couldn't stomach it. She had been nothing, and now she was thriving without him. One evening, as Clara was rocking Hope to sleep in their cozy apartment, she heard a sharp knock at the door. Her stomach churned. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Carefully placing Hope in her crib, she crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. Her heart sank. Greg stood there, his face shadowed and his posture tense. "Clara, open the door," he called, his voice muffled but insistent. "I just want to talk." She didn't move. A lifetime of memories with Greg flashed through her mind, each bitter moment, each stinging word. She knew better than to trust him. Still, he continued knocking, his tone growing more agitated. "I know you're in there. Clara, don't do this to me." A part of her wanted to ignore him completely, but another part knew he wouldn't leave. She opened the door slightly, keeping the chain in place. "What do you want, Greg?" His eyes flickered with irritation before softening into an expression she recognized all too well. The practiced charm of a man who thought he could manipulate his way back into her life. "I'm not here to fight, Clara. I need a chance to explain." "There's nothing to explain," she replied firmly. "We're done. Whatever you think you can get from me, it's not happening." Greg's mask slipped, revealing the desperation beneath. "You don't understand. I'm out of options. Everything's gone. The house, the business, it's all gone. I just need a little help to get back on my feet." Clara stared at him, her resolve hardening. "You didn't care about me when I had nothing. Why should I care about you now?" His face twisted with anger. "I'm still Hope's father. You can't just shut me out." "She doesn't need a father who only shows up when it's convenient," Clara shot back, her voice unwavering. Now leave. And don't come back. Greg's eyes darkened, but he didn't push further. He stepped back into the dim hallway, muttering under his breath. Clara shut the door, leaning against it as her body trembled. She wouldn't let him ruin what she had built. The days that followed were peaceful but tense. Clara threw herself into her work with the foundation, pouring her energy into helping others while savoring every precious moment with hope. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger, a testament to Clara's determination to create a safe, loving environment. But Greg's bitterness festered. He began spreading rumors, contacting anyone who would listen, spinning stories about Clara and her unfair treatment of him. It wasn't long before a tabloid picked up his lies, running a salacious story about Clara's supposed cruelty and greed. Clara was devastated when she saw the article. It painted her as a manipulative woman who had abandoned Greg in his time of need, capitalizing on her lottery win while he suffered. For a moment, the shame and pain threatened to consume her. But then she remembered why she had built the foundation, why she had fought so hard to rebuild her life. With Evelyn's support, Clara issued a public statement through the foundation, calmly refuting Greg's claims. She also released her own story, a candid account of her journey from being abandoned on Christmas Eve to building a life of hope and purpose. The response was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of resilience and thanking Clara for her courage. Greg's attempt to tarnish her reputation backfired spectacularly. Donations to the foundation poured in, and Clara's story became a rallying cry for single mothers everywhere. Meanwhile, Greg found himself increasingly isolated. The few friends he had left turned their backs on him, disgusted by his actions. One crisp autumn morning, as Clara prepared to attend a fundraiser for the foundation, she received a call from Margaret. The older woman's voice was warm with pride. "You've come so far, Clara. You've turned something tragic into something beautiful." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Margaret. You gave me hope when I had none." Later that evening, as Clara stood on stage at the fundraiser, she looked out at the crowd, a sea of faces, each one touched by her story in some way. Holding hope in her arms, she spoke from the heart, her voice steady and clear. "This journey hasn't been easy," she began, "but it's taught me something important. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about rising again and again, no matter how many times you're knocked down. I hope my story reminds everyone here tonight that second chances are worth fighting for." The room erupted into applause, a thunderous sound that brought tears to Clara's eyes. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. And she had done it all for hope. Somewhere far from the glow of the event, Greg sat alone in a dingy apartment, surrounded by empty bottles and the remnants of his former life. He had lost everything, not just the material wealth he once prized, but the respect of those around him. For the first time, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. As Clara and Hope left the fundraiser that night, the crisp air felt like a promise of brighter days ahead. Clara glanced at her daughter, her heart swelling with love and determination. Together they had weathered the storm, and together they would continue to rise. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.